What do you see really drives performance and intrinsic motivation?
The reality is I don't believe that every role has to have a performance incentive, because the reality is that most people are not actually as money motivated as we see. Money doesn't create motivation. Money only directs it.
Organizations have rhythm, whether it's weekly, daily, monthly, quarterly. How do you structure that?
The frequency of meetings can and should change according to the rate of change within that part of the business. Maybe those check-in calls could have been better, but when you're not owning the result, who cares?
So a lot of people listening are CEOs, COOs. Tell us, what's the main difference between a real CEO and COO?
Yeah, so most CEOs that I know fall into this kind of like visionary avatar. They are these really creative, fast-moving, hardworking, charismatic leaders. They have these bold visions for their business and where they want to take it. And they are generally complemented by the COO, or maybe you call them an ops manager, a head of operations, right? They are that second in command. And their job is to take the CEO's vision and to actually make it a reality. I think of it as like the gas pedal and the brake pedal of a car. You need both to drive the car safely. And if it's all visionary, all CEO, all the time, that car is going to go into a catastrophic accident or explosion, right? The COO is there to respectfully but necessarily pump the brakes to make sure that the car is moving as fast as possible while still staying at a safe speed and keeping the car together as it careens down the highway.
And so tell us, you're telling us what they do, but tell us specifically also what they don't do. Because I think a lot of CEOs and COOs might be doing some tasks that aren't appropriate for them. So maybe dive into that.
Yeah, totally. So let's start with the CEOs. And it's really challenging because CEOs, when they are founders and starting their business, they do everything, right?
Yeah.
And so we as entrepreneurs assume that maybe doing everything is just our job, when in fact, that is not your job at all, right? Like the job of being a CEO is one hat within the business. You hopping on and closing a deal is not you being the CEO, it's you being a closer, right? You're wearing a different hat within the company. And so there's all these hats that need to be worn. When you start, you're the person wearing all of those hats. But as you start to build and stack a team, your job really ends up with just one hat, and that's CEO. So the job of the CEO is set the strategic vision for the business, form big opportunities, strategic partnerships. In the day and age of content, it's generally being the face or the brand of the business. These are the things that a CEO can and should do. Everything else is them wearing some other hat within the business. And generally CEOs get confused or hold onto those hats way too long because they assume that because I'm the founder, I should be doing everything, as opposed to building the team that can take most of that off of your plate for you.
So tell us a little bit more about rhythm, right? Organizations have rhythm, whether it's weekly, daily, monthly, quarterly. How do you structure that specifically?
Yeah, so the two best practices when it comes to structuring meetings and how often they should happen. The first is that human beings do really well within routine, right? If I am in routine, if I'm in flow, then I know how to show up to every next step of my day, and I'm able to be as productive as possible. Meetings are essentially the rhythm of your company. They're the cadence. And so almost all companies have certain cadences for different conversations, meaning at the leadership level, the highest level, the executive level, that cadence is like once a quarter where they're sitting down and they're setting big, bold priorities for the company. Then they're meeting on a monthly basis where they're setting monthly priorities and monthly goals. Then there's meetings on the weekly basis. Then there's meetings on the daily basis. But the purpose of it is that when it's consistent, you're able to form habits and your team will actually get more productive and more efficient over time when they're able to like kind of row to a repeatable rhythm. It's like having a metronome if you're trying to play a piece of music. It just keeps everything on track. So that's the first best practice. The second best practice is that thinking of your meetings like feedback loops. I know I'm about to say two contradictory things, but the frequency of meetings can and should change according to the rate of change within that part of the business. So for example, if we are totally rebuilding our sales team and our sales system, then my meeting with the sales team should increase in frequency. Because when there's a lot of change happening in the business, it becomes really easy for people to like get off of the same page. Everyone's moving so fast, it becomes really easy to start sprinting in different directions. So taking those two best practices and kind of combining them, there should be a regular meeting cadence where the same conversations are taking place across the business, really at the leadership level at a minimum. But then in like kind of the more microscope, the frontline level, if there's a lot of change happening in a company, you should feel empowered to change the meeting menu for that department or for a period of time. Because if the rate of change in the business is changing, then the rate of communication needs to change to match.
And what do you mean specifically by meeting menu?
Yes. So a meeting menu is essentially just like the full drop down of all of the meetings taking place across the business. Like I give a meeting menu template, for example, to the operators in my program so they can structure out the meetings across the company. The meeting menu is what the operator owns, the operator is building, and they are essentially controlling the meeting menu. They are auditing that meeting menu regularly and making sure like, are our cadences on, are our routines on, and are these meetings all still effective and useful? The meeting menu should include things like the meeting agenda, the goal and the purpose of each meeting, which attendees are on each meeting. They're essentially just outlining what is this meeting, who's on it, and who is it for, so that they're making sure that at every moment in time, if we're going to have meetings, our team is talking as effectively and efficiently as possible.
And how do you link meetings, because a lot of people will sometimes diverge within those meetings, how do you link meetings with prioritization?
Yeah. So this is where the agenda becomes really important, right? Most people sit down to a meeting. Nobody knows really what we're here to talk about. So I'm just going to look at my to-do list really quick and then bring some stuff to the table. So there's no prioritization. There's no agenda for that meeting. And it's kind of like an all hands, like anything goes type of approach. And so you end up with agenda items that have nothing to do with each other, right? We're going to talk about one client fire. And then right after that, we're going to talk about sales. And then right after that, we're going to talk about this like huge strategic question for the business because that just popped into my mind and now I want to talk about it. The point of the meeting menu is to separate out those conversations. So if leadership is going to have a strategic level, high level conversation, that's happening in a different meeting than when they're getting together and they're talking about tactical priorities for the week. If sales is going to have a conversation, that is a different meeting than marketing having a conversation, right? And so these meeting menus, even across small teams, even if you have members of your team that are on the sales huddle, the marketing huddle, and the product huddle, it's important to separate out the conversations because then every conversation is as effective and targeted as possible. You get in, you say what needs to be said, and then you get back to work. And in that environment with those agendas, meetings happen really effectively, they happen really quickly, and there's not a lot of talking happening outside of those meetings. Because the other thing I see with unstructured meeting agendas is like, all right, we just hopped off the call. Thanks, everybody. That was great. Oh, shit. I forgot to talk about 5 more things. So now I'm blowing up your Slack channel. Everyone's blowing up everyone's Slack channel because we didn't actually have a pre-structure to make sure that everything that needed to be said was said in real time. So that now, like, for the most part, my Slack is quite quiet throughout the day, which I know is not what most CEOs would say. Like, it's pretty quiet because we get together, we say what needs to be said, and then everybody just goes and gets their work done. That's how it should be.
And when you're talking about everyone getting their work done, I'm thinking about incentives, KPIs. How does that integrate maybe relationship to the meeting, but in general, so that people know what to do and they just do it?
Yeah. So when it comes to setting KPIs, right? Every role across the business should have KPIs and targets that they are responsible for, right? And that is for an account manager, let's say, for example, in like a marketing agency. That's not number of client check-in calls done every single week. That's client lifetime value and client retention, right? Like what is the highest result, the highest deliverable, the North Star metric that role is responsible for within the company? If every single person on your team understands that this is what my role is, and this is how I connect to the money pipeline, this is how I create growth within the business, that offers so much clarity and so much alignment around what should my priorities be, what should I be focusing on, and what am I here to drive towards? Versus without KPIs, without that accountability structure, everyone is just left with a to-do list, right? If I'm an account manager and my to-do list says, do 20 check-in calls this week, beautiful, I'll do 20 check-in calls, I'll mark it as done, I'll close my computer at 5 p.m. on Friday and I won't think about it again. But maybe those check-in calls were terrible. Maybe those check-in calls were with the wrong clients, the clients that didn't need a touch point. Maybe those check-in calls could have been better. But when you're not owning the result, who cares? Because I You said do 20 check-in calls, I did 20 check-in calls, done. And so I see a lot of CEOs get really frustrated with their team. They wish their team would be more proactive. They wish their team would take more ownership. They wish they would be more creative and innovative. But the reality is that starts with the CEO first, because if you as a leader haven't given every single member of your team a finish line, guys, no all-star athlete can run a race if they don't know where the finish line is. And so that's on you. That starts with the leader saying, here's your role. Here's what success looks like. Here's the finish line. Now run.
Mm-hmm. And how do those KPIs blend in with culture, right? Culture, incentives. And I've been reading about, you've been speaking about Zappos and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So how does that blend into culture?
Yeah. So it should be your team's culture to drive towards and hit their KPIs, right? I would separate these two things out. A KPI is, it's something data-backed. It's a metric. A culture is generally based off of core values, which are more, it's like quantitative versus qualitative, right? The ideal culture is one in which everybody is hitting and driving towards their KPIs in alignment with the core values. So KPIs answer the question, what? What does success look like? What does an A player in this role look like? What am I responsible for? What is the result I drive in the business? Core values and culture answers the question, how? How should I go about creating that result? How will I run this race? How will I get there? The core values guide alignment and behaviors and decision-making. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And do you also integrate, let's say, incentives for like quarters if you hit your KPIs or more? Is that something you've noticed is useful or not really?
I have a lot of hesitancy around advising people to do any kind of quarterly bonuses or bonuses really in general. The reason is, imagine like the obvious example here is like the annual Christmas bonus that everybody thinks they should do. What happens at the annual Christmas bonus? Everyone knows it's coming. They expect it. They get it. They say, yay, and then they move on. But no one's remembering in March, wow, my CEO is just so great. He gave me an amazing Christmas bonus this year. I'm going to work extra hard for him. What they will feel is that the next year, if performance is not as good and the bonus is not as big, they will feel angry, demotivated, and frustrated. So the problem with regular bonuses, like those two things are almost an oxymoron, because a regular bonus just becomes psychologically an expected baseline part of your salary. There's no winning there. You can only ever deliver the bonus. And if you don't, they're angry about it. But if you do, you see no uptick in motivation or performance. And so when it comes to KPIs, I think that you should hit your KPIs because that's your job. That's your job within my business. I'm paying you a fair salary to do the job. And the job means you hit your KPIs because there's no one on this team who's not going to hit their KPIs. That's the minimum cultural standard we have set, right? I'm not going to attach a bonus to you just doing your job, because then I'm setting myself up for failure, and frankly, you too, because now you're psychologically, we're just climbing up this ladder and it's a race to the top and there's no winning there. So I would separate out bonuses versus like performance compensation, right? Like people are probably saying now, like, what about sales? What about commission? Separate, right? That's structuring out a compensation plan based off of performance related to KPIs as separate from like a quarterly bonus that happens if you just do your job.
Of course. Okay.
Yeah.
So your philosophy is more on the performance basis, and I'm guessing I'm seeing a lot of transition towards more performance-based roles with performance incentives.
Yep.
So how do you usually think about that?
Yep. So compensation 101, if you're going to do a performance-based model, number one is that pick the metric that you're going to attach it to. Pick the highest metric that is still within that person's control. So for example, if I was a ops manager and I was just responsible for like day-to-day client fires, day-to-day systems management, and then my CEO says, cool, you're going to be attached to profit. Okay, cool. But I don't know how to move the lever on profit. I don't know what is making our company profitable or not. You maybe aren't letting me see the P&L, so I couldn't move profit if I tried, right? So that metric is too high for what is within the control of that individual role. And there is nothing more frustrating than having your money being messed with when it's outside of your control. So when choosing that metric, everybody wants to attach it to these really big outcomes. But the reality is like if that role doesn't directly affect or control that outcome, you're just going to leave that person out of control when it comes to their own money. And that's not a good feeling for them. So lower the metric down, right? For sales, this is pretty straightforward. This is a volume of clients closed or a percentage of clients closed. That is fully within your control and it moves the needle forward. It's directly linking that role to the money pipeline. Those are solid metrics to go with.
Okay, and some roles are a little bit more admin oriented or ops oriented. How do you create bonus structure performance incentives in those kinds of roles?
The reality is I don't believe that every role has to have a performance incentive because the reality is that most people are not actually as money motivated as we see, like money motivated CEOs really think they are, right? There's certain departments, I think sales being the most notable, where having the right compensation plan is really important because it will affect motivation and output. But to the average like admin or operations role, the reality is that money doesn't create motivation. Money only directs it. If you're an unmotivated team member and I pay you more, you're not going to be any more motivated 60 days from now. I'm going to see this little blip and then it's going to go right back to where it was, right? So people who are trying to use compensation and performance compensation to like up level their team, get the highest performance, get the most motivation, you're kind of missing the mark because for most members, pay them fairly, pay them what they feel is fair value and equal value for what they're bringing into the business. Anything beyond that, and you're not actually going to see a bump in motivation, you're probably just going to create a lot of headache for yourself because now you're processing all of these really complicated compensation plans. Yeah.
Okay. And what are the other strategies? I'm mostly thinking about culture and cultural kind of events or that kind of stuff to enhance performance for across the company.
Yeah. So it's funny, I was just talking about this on stage at the agency founders event. So there's a difference between extrinsic motivators and intrinsic motivators. Extrinsic motivators are things like bonuses, pay raises, compensation, job titles. These are things external to me in my environment that are trying to act on my motivation, right? Intrinsic motivation is what comes from within me. How motivated do I want to be? How hard do I want to work? What do I want to give to this business? All of the data is in, Robert. Extrinsic motivators do a really shit job at actually creating motivation compared to intrinsic motivators. So if anybody wants to dive deep into this topic, the book that I'd recommend that you check out is called Drive by Dan Pink. And he talks about the 3 core pillars of intrinsic motivation and how to create that within your team. The reality is that if you are just focusing on extrinsic motivators, you're spending a lot of money, you're giving out a lot of raises and job titles, and you're not actually moving the needle when it comes to team performance and motivation. That input to output ratio does not make sense to me. I would rather focus all of my time and energy on the intrinsic motivators, still pay my people well, still give them a fair job title, still treat them well when it comes to extrinsic motivation. Like you don't want to demotivate them. But really my focus as a leader is on the intrinsic motivators because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, mostly because it's free. Yeah.
And what specifically do you do? Do you have any examples that you've seen across companies? What do you see really drives performance and intrinsic motivation?
Yeah, so I'll briefly cover the 3 pillars. And then if people want to read the book, they can. So the 3 pillars are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. The first one is autonomy. Autonomy is agency. It's control. It's the ability to be a master of your own fate and make your own decisions. People are highly motivated in autonomy-driven environments. On the flip side, the easiest way to imagine this is remember how everybody freaking quit when their bosses forced them back into the office after COVID? Why? Because they felt like their autonomy was being taken away from them. And so they got angry, they got frustrated, they got demotivated, and some of them quit their businesses because they were so upset about it. The reverse is also true. If you can create a working environment like at our company where you have total flexibility over when you work, total flexibility over where you work. Like my team can work from a co-working space. They can work from another country. That's totally up to them. There are no strict 9 to 5 input output kind of parameters and constraints we're putting on them. I want to give them maximum autonomy because in that environment, you're going to see maximum motivation. So that's the first one. Mastery is the second. This is the pursuit of growth. People are motivated by growth. They really want to do well. They want to get better. They want to feel like they're making progress in their lives. So how can you as a leader help them see that by them leveling up in their role, by them performing really well in their role, they're actually leveling up themselves. They're actually chasing their goals and what they want to create for themselves by showing up and doing their best work for you. When you can align somebody's intrinsic drive to grow and be better and achieve personal goals with showing up in their role and giving you their best performance, now you're not showing up for me. You're not working your ass off for me. You're not staying up late for me. You're not thinking about your job on the weekends for me. You're doing it for you. Because by doing all of those things, you're driving towards your goals. And that is going to get way more output than you showing up and me forcing you to try and work hard for me. You don't owe me anything, right? So that's the second one. And then the third one is purpose. Purpose is being a part of something bigger than yourself. This is where core values, mission, vision, this is where this comes in. Like, does their work matter? Does their work have impact? Or is the reality of their work is that they're just here to make you more money? One of those is going to get more motivation and output than the other.
And when it comes to mastery, especially, how do you help people become masters, and like, how do you coach them through the process of growing as individuals? Yeah,
so we were talking about meetings. One of the meetings that I recommend every manager have with every person that they are managing is a weekly check-in call. The weekly check-in call is where you are doing this kind of mastery work. You're saying, hey, you're great. You're doing a great job. You're here, but I think you could be even better. Here's the gaps that I'm seeing. Here's the areas for improvement. Here's the next challenge that we can line up for you that's going to help you grow even bigger and bolder and better. And when you're having that conversation on a weekly basis, they're feeling that accountability. They're feeling that growth coaching all the time. And they're seeing themselves leveling up in your business all the time. That is deeply motivating. It's really exciting to somebody, and it's going to make them stay with you for way longer because they see a pathway for growth for themselves at your company, as opposed to like one of the top reasons that people quit is they're like, I just don't see where I'm going in this job. I don't see what's next for me. That's the leader's responsibility to make that clear to that individual.
And what are the kind of leadership frameworks? Like, do you have specific communication that you share with the ops person, or is it the CEO, or who should be sharing that kind of feedback?
The reality is like every leader in the business is going to have people who they are leading, right? So the CEO is responsible for this for their leadership team. Your head of operations is responsible for your ops team. Your head of marketing is responsible for the marketing team. And to go on a bit of a rant here, one of the biggest mistakes that I see made is that people are internally promoting. CEOs will internally promote their top performer. So I see this all the time in the sales team, right? You've got this amazing closer. He's an absolute savage. You think he's like, wow, he's amazing. He's so good. I want to promote him. I want to reward him. So you move him into like a sales manager role. What does a sales manager do? Sales manager is training and checking in with his people. He's listening to call recordings. He's going to leadership huddles. He's doing all the things that are not showing up on a call and closing a deal, the thing that he loves, the thing that he's great at. And so by internally promoting people based off of performance, as opposed to, or like just based off of performance, as opposed to also looking at, are they a good manager of people? Do they want to have weekly growth check-ins with their teammates? Is that fulfilling to them? Would they enjoy that? Are they good at it? Then you're going to be taking your top performer, you're going to be taking them out of their zone of genius where they were driving the most amount of value to your business. And you're going to really demotivate them and burn them out because now they're in a role that they don't actually want to be doing. So I only internally promote a manager if I think that that person is going to be a better manager than they were a performer in the role. Otherwise, let them stay and help them grow within that vertical.
And what are the other things that you help when someone wants to develop their skills, or how do you help organizations develop skills? Otherwise, like, do you buy courses? Is there a philosophy around that, or?
Sure. I mean, I think that if you, as like many of us CEOs start as subject matter experts. So like if I started a marketing agency, I know something about marketing. I can be the coach. I can be the course that is helping my media buyers level up their marketing skills. What I see a lot of CEOs do is they take all the pressure to be an expert at everything and they put that on themselves. If someone's going to train them, it has to be me. Where I really see this is in operations, because most CEOs are frankly terrible at operations, and that's totally okay. But they put it on themselves to like, all right, I've got a new ops manager. I have to train them. I have to show them how to do their job. They have to do their job this way. When the reality is that operator could probably do a way better job in that role than you if they had the proper training from somebody who actually understood the role and was actually an expert at it. So I think there's a level of self-awareness when it comes to being a CEO. What are you actually qualified to coach and train on versus what have you just like kind of been scraping by doing a good enough job in? And in those roles, be able and willing to invest in outside resources to bring in the coaching and training that lets that person level up.
And one of those is probably your training and everything, especially on the ops side.
100%.
And I see a lot of CEOs, as you're saying, basically the main mistake of trying to take too much responsibility for too many things.
Yep.
And so how do you clearly divide that with the COO?
Yeah. So the CEO, every CEO is slightly different, right? We all have our unique zones of genius, the things that we do so like better than anything else. Those are the things that you as a CEO should hold on to, you should protect. You should actually, as you go, be pouring more and more of your time into less and less things. Versus I see most often the complete opposite. As a business scales, I'm spending less and less time doing more and more things, right? The whole point of building a team is that every single person, COO included, should be better at that job than you were at that job. Because if they're performing even better in the role, if you hired that subject matter expert, that specialist, to do that job and take it entirely off of your plate, now it's entirely off of your plate. You can lead and manage that person, but you're not stepping in to fix their fires. You're not stepping in to solve their problems. They can do that for themselves. And so now you are freeing up time and reallocating that time into your zone of genius, into the things that you do best, because those are also the things that are going to drive the most amount of value into your business.
Yeah, and this is kind of touching to your philosophy, I think, in hiring, where I know you process a lot of people to go to just a few key hires that are really the best. Do you hire someone who already has the skills, or do you have another philosophy as well around training up those people? What do you think is the balance there?
Yeah. It ultimately comes down to what can you as the CEO afford, right? Time and money, I think of as opposite ends of a balance or a scale. The more you have of one, the less you need of the other. So if I'm small, I have no money, then all I have is time. And I'm going to invest in the high potential person because I can't afford the super experienced decades, perfect resume candidate. I just can't afford that person. So if you have a lot of time and not a lot of money, then you are going to be committing to hiring people based off of potential, and you're paying for that with time to train and level them up. Versus as you become a bigger business, you have more money, you have less time, and you should be evolving who you're hiring to match that. Hire the people who are more batteries included, they have more experience, because you're wasting less time now having to train them up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jhana, so we've covered a ton of things.
We have.
And you're dropping bombs constantly. Is there anything that you think as a last message you could give CEOs, COOs, for them to really continue to scale in the right way and not burn out either side? Is there a last message you would want to share with them?
Yeah, I think if we're talking about CEOs and operators in relationship and in unison together, the best thing that I can offer to you guys is that you have respect for each other's expertise and you recognize that you each fill a very unique and important role within the business. Robert, I can't remember if it was this podcast where we were talking about the gas pedal and the brake pedal, right? CEOs, you're the gas pedal. Operators, you're the brake pedal. You need both to drive the car safely. There's inherent tension between a gas pedal and a brake pedal. In fact, they do almost opposite things. And so in many dynamics, I see that create a lot of friction, a lot of tension, a lot of resentment in the relationship, as opposed to flipping that and realizing oh, visionary, when you're going way too fast and you're driving me freaking crazy, that's actually you doing your job. That's actually you being a great CEO. And in reverse, when your ops manager or COO is coming to you and being we're not ready for that yet, we can't do that yet, let's push that to next quarter. That's not them slowing down your dreams. That's them protecting your business so that it continues to be scalable, sustainable for everybody on board. And so if you can honor the differences, in fact, if you can find somebody who is different and complements you in that way, yes, there will be inherent tension there, but it's going to be a healthy tension that ultimately moves the business forward.
Very nice. Thanks for your time, Jhana. I'm sure the audience has appreciated all those golden nuggets you've dropped.
Absolutely.
And so they can find you on Facebook, right, directly.
Yep.
Jhana Li.
Yep. Facebook,
Spyglass
Instagram.
Ops.
Yeah, so top social media guys, Facebook, Instagram, and actually, Robert, I just launched my YouTube channel.
Nice.
Yes, so Jhana Li Spyglass on YouTube. If you like more long form, deep dive, real ops value, YouTube would be the place for that. If you're interested in working with me and seeing what we do at Spyglass Ops, the website is spyglassops.com.
Perfect. Thanks for your time, Jhana.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.